Hi, and welcome to a Small, Medium, at Large podcast. I'm your host, Gail Hyson, bringing you intimate interviews beyond normal boundaries. Today's guest, Sean McNamara, was with us about a year ago, and we're so happy to have him back here today. But for those listeners who haven't heard anything about him, we'll give you a quick, short bio. Sean McNamara lives in Denver, Colorado with his wife, Sierra. He has a master's degree in clinical mental health counseling and a bachelor's degree in computer scientist. He enjoys playing music, paddle boarding, walking in nature, chocolate chip cookies, my favorite, and road trips to Colorado's western slope and the Utah desert. His most recent book is Coping with UFOs, UAP in the News and in Real Life, a public self-care guide with insights from the Future Planet Survey. He also has written numerous other books, and today the book we're going to be talking about is Dewdrops of Infinity, which I have right here to show you. This is our book today we're going to be talking about, but he has written numerous other books that I highly recommend, which are Renegade Mystic, which is a story of his discovery, Signal and Noise, Advanced Psychic Training book, Mind Sight, Training to See Without Your Eyes, Blue Thumb, How to Grow Psilocybin Mushrooms at Home, and it's an incredible with photos guide on how to do this yourself, Meditation, and Telekinesis, the Telekinesis Training Method, Lucid Dreaming, and Out-of-Body Experiences. Sean can be contacted or looked up at on www.mindpossible.com. That's MIND, capital POSSIBLE.com, and www.life, capital TENDING.net. So for all you listeners who aren't watching on YouTube, you'll be able to know where to contact Sean if you'd like to find out more information about him and all the different things he has to offer. He has very many videos. You can watch telekinesis as he performs it. He's an amazing teacher and also new to my podcast as a friend now. We've become friends since our last show a year ago. So let's welcome Sean here today. Hi, Sean.
Hi, Gail. Thanks for having me today.
Oh, it's just a pleasure. And I just want to say to our audience, I went out and met Sean and another podcast guest we had, Donna Rivadow, and we had an absolutely wonderful time in Colorado. And he got to share his favorite place in the mountains with us, and we had a wonderful time. So today we want to talk about Dewdrops of Infinity, which, along with the Coping with UFOs UAP, came out in August. These are your two newest books, correct?
Yeah. I sort of
Wonderful.
at the same time. Yeah.
Yes, you're an amazing you do an amazing accomplishment on your book publishing. I'd like to know, and other people have asked me, is in fact some of the people I've given the gifts to of your book was Stanley Krippner recently, and also Sean Lennon, John Lennon's son, who were both very interested, and our friend Russell Togg read your book and also found it out to be a very phenomenal book. So you're getting great reviews from people who I know, but some of them have asked me, what is the Puharich project, and what is it, and what was it trying to determine, and how long it lasted? Can you first just tell our audience about this particular project?
Yeah. So the Puharich project. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's in the last line of the subtitle, and I know it's just, why is it there? And I really wanted to make sure that his name was on the cover of the book, because I named this project after him. And to make a really long story short, he is in a big way the inspiration for this project that I did. And so the main question that this project was trying to answer was, do psychedelics, or can psychedelics improve one's psychic perception? And the reason I thought of even doing this project was, one day I was on YouTube looking at different things, and Andrei Puharich, who was a medical doctor, I think he passed away in the early 90s, but he's a really important researcher in parapsychology. He did a lot of psychic research. He also was very innovative with hearing technologies. He was in the Army, and back in the 1950s, the Army was asking him about, hey, what do you think we could do to enhance psychic functioning? So he did a lot of work, and he even wrote a book about his work with a mushroom called Amanita muscaria. It's the red one with the white dots on it, and the book is called The Sacred Mushroom. I'd read his other books before for research on some other training that I offer, but I had ignored his mushroom book at the time because I had no interest in mushrooms and I had no idea what it was really about. But then I saw this documentary on YouTube. It's a 20-minute show from the 1960s from this program called One Step Beyond. And it's great because it's black and white, it's gritty, you know, it's that old 1960s film. But it was a real documentary of him and a group of scientists and researchers going to Mexico. And this is shortly after Gordon Wasson went to Mexico and experienced the mushroom himself. So Andrea Puharich followed him. And the documentary shows them going to this village, trying to connect with some of the healers there who have a connection with the mushroom. It shows some of the psychic abilities those healers had, what they experienced. And then at the last part of the show, it shows Andrea with the show's host, John Newland. They go back to his home in Los Angeles and do a series of ESP tests, first while John is sober, and then Andrea Puharich, you see him, which is incredible for 1960s. You see him on film giving him mushrooms that he eats, and he's under the influence. And then he repeats the tests, and his performance is significantly better. And it's all captured on film. And I was sitting here watching this going, this is amazing. And I wonder if I could do this too. Because I had I've already done a lot of experiments that I've written about in the past, but so experimenting wasn't new for me. And this was new. And around the same time, I was watching other movies about mushrooms. Paul Stamets was really coming into the public eye, and his research with mushrooms and psychedelics and other psychedelic information was coming out. And I thought, I wonder if what I could do with this. And I talked to a friend about it, and then she wanted in, and that was Donna, by the way. She's the first one I told about it. So I'm thinking about doing this experiment. And she said, I'm in. Okay. And I thought it would be good to have several other people involved so we could compare their results. And so initially the project design was 6 months long. 3 of us would be microdosing either psilocybin mushrooms or Amanita muscaria for periods of time. And the 5 other participants wouldn't be microdosing anything. And we would all take the same test. So we were all taking several ESP tests every week for 6 months. And at the time, at the beginning of the project, I was putting together everyone's project folders, which ended up being binders about this thick, because I wanted them to be able to take their tests at home. And some of these tests could be self-scored. Some of them I would score at the end of the project, but some were very easy to score by themselves. In the morning, I was printing out these binders. I was sitting on the floor next to my printer, and it felt, and I have a little bit of experience with mediumship, but I'm not sure if that's what was happening here. It felt like Andrea Puharich was standing in the room next to me while I'm sitting on the floor putting these binders together, because I was trying to come up with a title or page to put on the title of the binder, and it felt like he was there. And I don't know if he really was, but I was like, you know what? This guy has inspired all this, and I'm sure he's inspired so many other scientists. So I named it the Puharich Project after him. And he's a controversial figure for many reasons. And I've heard that there's a documentary of him coming out at some point, maybe in the next year or two. So people will get to know more about him. But I wanted to honor him. I always like to honor the scientists who've inspired me. So I try to mention them when I can in my books. So I named this one after him, and then the project after him. So
do you mind just repeating once more for our audience the 30-minute black and white film, that just in case that anybody missed that?
Yeah, the link is in the book, but here it is. If you want to go to YouTube, do a search for One Step Beyond the Magic Mushroom, and those are the keywords, and you should pull up the documentary with Andrea Puharich. You could also have his name, Puharich, and see if it comes up. So it's a brief video, but it's really worthwhile. And it kind of kicked off the next year of my life, because those 6 months were about microdosing. And during that time, I'd grown all the mushrooms except the amanita. You can't grow it at home. You have to just get the caps. I ordered some online, but I'd become proficient at growing psilocybin. I look over there because I'm growing some right now, but I'd grown proficient at growing psilocybin mushrooms. And I thought at the end of the project, I have all this psilocybin. I know I have to go further. I have to take large doses, and I won't involve anyone else because there's always a risk, and I wasn't willing to put anyone else at risk for this project.
I just interrupt for 1 second.
Yeah.
Two things our listeners might not know is that mushrooms are legal in Colorado to grow and ingest. And in some other states it's not, but you were doing this project it was all legal for you to be doing this.
Mm-hmm.
I want listeners to know that, depending what state you live in. And also, am I correct? You'll have to correct me on this. Was this since your most of your life? It's not like you were someone who was doing psychedelics, and it was not something like, oh yeah, I did mushrooms this week or anything like this. This was something you'd really only maybe adventured with once in college or something. This was not your path.
Yeah, it's not, it wasn't part of my life at all. And you're right, in college, I had a couple experiences with psilocybin mushrooms, which were just flat out dumb. I mean, I was doing it the way nobody should do them. I was in college. I had no idea how much I was taking. I just filled a peanut butter and jelly sandwich with mushrooms that someone had given me, and I ate them. And it was a terrible time. Probably what people would describe as a bad trip, although these days that's not really a good phrase. There's a challenging trip, and that's what I had because I had no guidance whatsoever, and I was not of the right mindset. It was not the right setting. And at the time I thought, I will never do mushrooms again after the second time, right? Never again. So that's why I was open initially to doing microdosing, because a microdose means it's sub-perceptual. It's beneath conscious experience. So you're not tripping when you do microdosing. Some people might say that it's okay to feel it a little bit, but really you're not. My line that I draw is you're not supposed to feel different. You might have a little bit of an elevated mood, and that's the psychological benefit of it. But so I wasn't afraid of doing very, very small microdoses. But by the end of the project, I thought, we've had some interesting results, and I have this stuff, and I also have been gifted some other psychedelics. And I thought I have to take the next step. So the next 6 months involved me taking large doses of psilocybin, LSD, Amanita muscaria, and DMT, which I learned how to extract myself too. So I just extracted it in my living room. It felt like a Breaking Bad scene because you have to use some pretty dangerous chemicals to do that. So that was the next 6 months of my life, taking a chance on myself and going really deep and doing the same ESP tests that we had done the previous 6 months. And all I can say is I'm so grateful for the years and years of meditation that I practiced, because that is probably the only thing that made me capable of holding my stuff together to do these tests. It was very hard because every time all I wanted to do was lay down in bed and go on my journey. But instead I had to be conscious and focus on clairvoyance and telepathy and remote viewing, all these tests that we were doing, which is really, I video recorded myself, and people can access the video through the book. I've hidden a link in the book so people can watch videos of me under the influence. When you watch me, you see that I'm straining just to hold my sense of self together enough to do these ESP tests. But again, the results were interesting. And so over that year was basically composed of week after week of seven different types of ESP or psychic tests. So it was telepathy, remote viewing, and then different types of clairvoyance, like blindfolded and behind a barrier, trying to match up different sets of tarot cards to each other, or looking at a picture but not looking at it. It's just on the table, and using your hands to focus and picking up what you perceive through the hands and through your mind, which is not that different from remote viewing, actually. Or looking at using sheets of paper with shapes of different colors and trying to put them in piles, like, oh, I think this is a red heart, this is a yellow triangle. and the pieces of paper that were black on one side and then white on the other, and trying to arrange them so that white was all on the same side, but all while blindfolded behind a barrier. So there were two ways to prevent any accidental cheating. So all the participants had this barrier at home. They all had blindfolds. They all had their packets. And the
But did
test that I scored, mhm.
they do this all at the same time? Like, was everybody at Friday, 2 o'clock to sit down and do this, or were they this to do it whenever they felt was the time for them?
Yeah, I wanted to make it comfortable and practical for them. So the general outline was, this week, here are the 3 or 4 specific tests you have to do this week. And you can do them all, please do them all at least once. You can do them multiple times.
Mm.
Just look at all your scores for all of them. But just make sure that in this week you do these tests. Then the next week, these are the other tests that you do. But within that week, find the time when you feel you're at your optimal state of mind. When are you feeling rested? When are you good? Because I think one thing that's what was important about this project is different from a normal laboratory setting. If someone goes to a scientific organization to be tested for psychic abilities, you have to show up at 1 o'clock or 5, whatever time is, sit down, do the test for as long as they tell you to, no matter what mood you're in or what your stomach's doing or what's going on in your personal life. You just sit down and do it, and which I think has the capacity to kill the effect. You know, it's like being an athlete. You want to, when an athlete's going to perform or compete, they want to be in an optimal state of mind. Everything gets prepared so that they're in a good head space and a good heart space. So I left that flexibility in the study of every week in people's schedule. You choose when you think you're going to perform the best. But the one of the interesting things I found out, excuse me, that a lot of people might not like to hear was, for a lot of these tests, actually, I think for all the tests, I had a space in their record keeping where they would record, how do you feel before taking the test? What's your state of mind? And then also, how did you feel right after the test was over? Was there any shift in your mood or your energy level? And so after the project was done, I collected all their logbooks and I created these spreadsheets for every participant. So we're measuring their mood states for hundreds of tests, over 6 months that they did it, to compare, for example, if did they do better when they were in a good mood? Did they perform badly or poorly when they were in a bad mood or when they were tired? Because I think these days a lot of people think, yeah, if you're feeling rested and energized and focused and you're in a good mood, you'll perform better psychically. Well, what I found out was it does not make a lick of difference.
Uh-huh.
All. And I know people just want to believe that it's important for you to be in a good mood or feel rested, or it doesn't matter. It does. That's what the results showed. It really doesn't matter. And I wrote in the book, it's like you can ride a bicycle when you're in a good mood. You can ride a bicycle when you're in a bad mood or when you're a little bit sleepy. You can still ride the bicycle. So it's that type of skill set. And I like to say this, so I hope it sets people free to let go of, oh, I need to wait till I'm in a better state of mind to do this.
Right.
Because it kind of doesn't matter. Over a long period of time, your results are going to be about the same.
So how many participants did you have in this, and was it equal, like men and women, or were they all similar ages, or how did you pick from your
Yeah.
people?
So I really just invited this group of friends that I have here in Denver, who, if anyone read my other book, Signal and Noise, it has their profiles in the beginning that we did some remote viewing.
Hmm.
We won the pick 3 lottery twice using remote viewing together. So I always like to throw that out there as a little win we had. Uh,
Right.
but so I invited them, and so some people from that group were here. So it was me and 7 people, including Donna Rebido. And in that group of 7, there was a couple who in the book I named Mr. and Mrs. Gingerbread to keep their to hide their identities just because of their professional situation. So there was a male there, and hopefully I'm not forgetting, but I think he and I were the only 2 men, and the rest were women, anywhere from their 30s into their, I think, late 60s, if I remember right. So, a wide span of age there, but mostly women, and which is that I noticed that over all the years that I've taught meditation courses and I teach ESP training of different types, it's mostly women who come to these programs. And I don't know if it's because of that stereotype that they're more intuitive. And I don't know if it's a stereotype or not, but it just seems that they're more
Well,
curious about what's going on inside.
I just want to say I've attended many different types of retreats and psychic things and other kind of gatherings of people. And that's one of the first things I always check when I see the group. How many women are there to men? And the only place that I found more men than women in any group setting for a spiritual or seeking or whatever kind of thing we're talking about here in that area, only Zen meditation was the only place where there were more men than women of any different retreat I had gone to. But there were always mostly more women that were pursuing spiritual ideas or thoughts of, afterlife and these kind of things. Yet the people that I see that write the most books and are speakers are often men. Yet when I see the audiences, there seems to be a larger percentage of women. And I don't know if it is because they're more open and seeking. I have no idea either, but it's something that's been curious to me to see.
Yeah. Well, and there's something about that with the book and the whole project too, that it was mostly women who were participants. And even though the Puharich, his name is on the cover, the book, I think in some unintended accidental sense, it's really an honoring to the feminine spirit, because right off the bat, it acknowledges Maria Sabina, the woman in that Mexican village that Gordon Wasson went, and she opened up the world of psilocybin mushrooms to him, and through him and his wife, the whole modern technological world found out about the mushroom, which had the unfortunate effect of destroying her village, because all these people from North America came down, and it was around the hippie time. So they came to her village, and her village punished her severely. So she suffered profound consequences because of her own openness. So I start the book by honoring her, because I think in a sense she really sacrificed a lot by sharing knowledge of this mushroom. And then there was a figure who was important to me once I started, or once the project had moved on, and that's Jean Mallet. Because I'd done a lot of other research to prepare for this project, but there was one book that I didn't even know about. And in all my research, I hadn't heard about it. But one night, and a lot of stuff comes to me like this in the middle of the night, but I was just laying there, and it's like I got this impulse, and I don't know where it came from, this very strong impulse to do another search online for books about psychedelics and psychic perception, because there's not a lot out there. And I keep looking and looking, and most of the stuff I found was from pre-1970, when psychedelic research was made illegal. So I found some really old stuff. But then here I find this book on this particular night, because I went out to the couch. I don't know what time it is. It's still dark outside. And for some reason, this time, a single copy of Jean Mallet's book showed up on my Amazon search.
Wow.
Multi-dimensional mind. And I thought, why did this? I've looked before and this hasn't shown up. But her book has been out of print for a long time. But here it was. And then I did another search and found that I could download it in PDF form. And so I did right then and there. And I started looking through it. And it was the most incredible psychic research book I've ever read. And it's a lot about remote viewing, and Uri Geller is one of the figures in her book, and the other researchers from very early on in the research in remote viewing. But what she reveals in this book is so incredible. I'm surprised that unfortunately, it's not still in active print. Maybe it'll come back, but it's really powerful, important. And I've read a lot of books, so I'm in a good place to compare. If anyone can get their hands on it on a used copy, do, and you will be blown away. But it was so inspiring to me. And what was really important is she brings up this thing that she called psychic soup, which was occurring especially in our group telepathy experiments. And what psychic soup is, and I borrowed her term and I credit her for it, is that let's say I have a target, and the target is a button, just a couple circles with marks inside. That's the telepathy target. And we would do these tests on Zoom. And so they're all trying to read my mind. And my camera is off, my microphone is off for 15 minutes. I'm just drawing over this picture of a button to see what they draw during that 50 minutes. Then I turn my camera and my microphone back on, and everyone holds up their transcript so we can compare. And there were a lot of hits. And if I can say anything about my book, and I don't like talking myself up very much, is if anyone's looking for extremely strong evidence for psychic functioning, if you'd like to see several hundred transcripts, get the book because it's all there. Their results were amazing. But let's say several of the transcripts have things reminiscent of the button. That's great. But in several cases, several people in that group would have another image, the same image showed up in their transcript, and it had nothing to do with the button. I think one of the examples of that was a flag, the same curvature in the flag and the same type of flagpole. So there, in one case, 2 or 3 people had drawn this flag shape that had nothing to do with the target. So in my mind is, where is this coming from? And this is psychic soup. The fact that sometimes mental objects appear in several people's mind at the same time, but the source of that object is mysterious. It's unknown, it's unintended, but they're all picking up on the same thing and writing it down on their transcript, which is really amazing in itself. But that's the question of, where's this information coming from, and why are they picking up on some of these objects that have nothing to do with the experiment, but they're all getting the same thing? And so Jean Millay wrote about this a lot in her book, Psychic Soup.
I wonder if that's the same thing that happens, or the reasoning or whatever behind this that occurs when a scientist in Australia and a scientist in Europe and a scientist in the United States all come up with some computer thing at the same time, or some new idea of how something should be done, and they're really not the only person. That they may be the one that gets the credit, but actually 3 people may have come up with that idea all at the same time in different parts of the world. So there seems to me there's some kind of mental link, that's what that might be proving, is why would 3 people in a group draw flags when flag wasn't even the target? Where did that information come from?
Yeah, I think you're spot on about, that's where a lot of innovation happens, that these ideas are, they're just out there. What was interesting, that there's a parallel to that I experienced on all the large dose trips that I took. So I experienced a lot of visuals, the hallucinations for hours. And so much of the geometry that appeared in my mind, so much of the colors and the patterns that appeared, it didn't take very long at all to realize. And for a lot of the viewers, they're going to be like, no kidding, Sean, we already know that, experience with psychedelics. The one thing I realized was, this is where, like, this is in our brain, or this is in our mind already, so much of this. And when you look at architecture, especially the most modern architectural designs that are artistic in their own way, that's very similar to the psychedelic geometry that I saw. When we look at indigenous original people's dress, the patterns in South America, North America, Australia, Asia, Europe, before Rome took over, look at all the small subcultures from thousands of years ago, the patterns of their dress that are usually associated with family lines, they're psychedelic. They're very closely linked with psychedelic imagery. And modern artists, and even not so modern artists, you look at their work, their abstract work, that's psychedelia. Those are psychedelic impressions being put on canvas. And I realized, so much of our world that we create, we might not know consciously, oh, I'm going to tap into my psychedelic mind to get some ideas for a new type of wardrobe, or a new type of automobile. But I think without knowing it, that's where our creativity is coming from, that psychedelic aspect of our mind. And most people tap into it without using psychedelics. It's just in us. But using psychedelics really brings it to the visual form. You could see these designs spontaneously, designs that I could never consciously sit down at a table with a pen and paper and draw. They're so elaborate. I mean, the mathematics of it, like, how does my mind know how to do this?
I had that experience once. I experimented with psychedelics in New York when I lived there as a teenager. but then I didn't do any psychedelics after I was 17. So I'm in the mountains of Mexico. I'm way up at 10,000 feet elevation with the Huichol Indians. It's my first time there ever, and I only recently discovered I was actually the third person ever to come to their village. That was the first white woman and the third outsider that wasn't from Mexico. And when I went to sleep the first night in my little adobe hut with my friend, it was in the sacred ceremonial grounds they call Las Latas that can only be gotten to by burro or foot or a helicopter. You can't drive there. And it had been used for peyote ceremonies for hundreds of years. And that's all that area was for. The temple keepers live there, but nobody else lives there year round. It's not their spot to live unless they're caring for the ground and the area. And I don't know much about it because it's my first trip to Mexico. And I go to sleep and when you see darkness there's no lights there. There was no electricity or any of those kind of things. So when it's dark, it's pitch black dark. And when you're in an adobe hut, there is no windows or anything. So there's no light to come in. And I wake up because I think I'm dreaming, but I visually see what you see on a computer, those tiny pixels, little tiny square pixels that are very colorful, and there's hundreds of them, and they're so tiny, and they form the shape of what we as kids knew when we would make them at school, the God's eye, and you would make it out of yarn. I did not know I was sleeping with the people who Carl Lumholtz, a anthropologist, had coined. These were the people who were the original makers of the God's eye. And that's where that whole yarn thing and that whole design came from. So when I woke, I thought I was waking up, and I realized when I opened my eyes, I was still seeing this vision in front of me in the pitch black darkness. So I'm shaking my friend and saying to him, wake up, can you see this? And I'm thinking, I'm not on peyote, I'm not tripping. Where could this vision come from? So I told his father about it. And that's when he explained to me that I was seeing the God's eye and that I was sleeping in a building that for hundreds of years people had been doing peyote ceremonies there. I did not understand the energetic effect of that, but there was a part of me that was visually seeing it. And I had to be sure I really wasn't sleeping. I really was awake. And I had someone to verify it, but he wasn't seeing what I was seeing. So I just want to say to our listeners, you can have these experiences with and without a psychedelic influence. And after telling the father that story, that ended up opening up a whole door for me. And I ended up being able to be invited to, I was invited then after that to the picking of the peyote, and it was to the ceremony, and all these other things opened up for me for the next 20 years with them. But that was the opening entrance, was being able to see the God's eye. And the amount of pixels and color, I could never draw what I saw. But if it was an artist, they would be able to replicate that kind of a thing. But I don't have that musical artistic ability to redo that. So I just want to say that's when I learned that could happen, and you didn't have to necessarily, that's possibilities in our minds.
Yeah, I think similar to the God's eye from that culture, if we look at the yogic traditions from India, there's the yantras, those geometric designs, the triangles that people sit and meditate and they look at them. That's a psychedelic image. And in the Himalayan Buddhist or Tibetan Buddhist traditions, there are different mandalas, like the Kalachakra Tantra mandala, this huge design, and they have them for every deity, of palaces and beings and everything. And now, after having done these large doses, now I understand, like, oh, this is a psychedelic. This is the interior, the deepest interior of the mind, beyond duality, put on paper. And people will sit and meditate and visualize that to try and experience that without the use of substances. So, but now I understand that across cultures, that's when we see this type of artistic work, especially in the spiritual tradition, we're trying to tap in to that. That's what we're seeing outside. It's already inside of us. And it's like this eternal part of our essence. coming out.
Well, I think the fact you're researching and sharing this information and writing these books is only going to benefit a lot of people. And you are very timely with this book, because even in the news and things, a lot of information is coming out about mushrooms now and all these other healing properties that it has, besides expanding your awareness, that it does wonderful things for depression and I don't know, maybe you could talk about some of the positive other effects of the mushroom ingesting.
Yeah. Well, I'll start by talking about my experience, because one thing I wasn't focusing on were the psychological benefits. I just wanted to see if it would make someone more psychic. And later on, we should probably get to what was the result of the study, but for now
Yes.
we can set that aside. But one thing that happened without me even trying, without planning or thinking about it, was about, I can't remember if it was 5 or 6 weeks into microdosing psilocybin. After a few days, I realized that I felt like a very different person, as if this heavy blanket of depression that I think I've lived with most of my adult life was gone. And that this level of anxiety that I was used to just being part of my normal psychological functioning was gone. And I had to talk to my wife about this a bit. Like, honey, this is how I'm feeling right now. And it feels really good. It's not up. It's just I feel like I can breathe again, and like I'm not paranoid all the time, and I'm not heavy or worn out by this depressive feeling I've had all for years and years. I said, "Is this how normal people feel?" She said, "Well, yeah, I think so." And then I really started paying attention to these studies about the positive effects of psilocybin on the mind, and so I had received that benefit of just microdosing. Suddenly, I wasn't depressed. It cured. I still get depressed once in a while, but it's not the same as chronic, lifelong, that layer that's been over my mind. That's shifted. Of course, I still have my ups and downs, and it takes work, I think. So I don't want to paint it as a golden bullet, but that's what have affected me. And now paying attention to the studies, yes, there's research showing that microdosing or taking a large dose can have a significant positive impact on depression, anxiety, um, even addiction. And one thing that I've never had a problem with alcohol, but I was never a big drinker. So I would call myself a light to moderate drinker, where maybe once or twice a week with dinner, have a glass or two of wine. That's the kind of drinker that I am. But one thing that's happened, I think this just happened in the last 6 months or so, is that's been taken away from me because I've continued microdosing, that my body just has no interest in alcohol at all. Even though it's not a problem, I'm not addicted to it. My body's like, no more for you. I just have no, and this might be too soon to say it out loud, but I'll say it anyway. It's starting to happen with caffeine now. Because I normally my routine is 2 to 3 cups in the morning throughout the whole morning. And now I'll pour myself a cup of coffee because I'm stubborn that way. But an hour will go by and I'll look at my cup and it's still only half drunk. Like I've only drunk half the cup of coffee, and I don't go and make a second or third cup. It's as if the psilocybin is waking up my mind's or my body's wisdom, or it's urging it to be a little more healthy. And so now it's cut out the alcohol. Now it's forcing me to lose interest in caffeine. So maybe I'll still enjoy decaf coffee because I love the flavor of coffee. But maybe I'll go decaf. And who knows what else will happen if I continue microdosing.
I have one insight, maybe it's not correct, but what just came to me when you said it is, I'm wondering if this works hand in hand with the fact that you've alleviated a lot of the underlying depression that you didn't even know was sort of carrying around with you. With that being gone, you might not feel the desire for that kind of uplift that I don't do coffee, but that caffeine gives you. And you might not feel that desire so much because you are feeling uplifted already. I mean,
Yeah.
that's just a thought about the caffeine, how it makes you feel. And now the mushroom has taken away the feeling of depression. You might not need those other things. And the alcohol, I think that probably was something when you say, that sounds like something like it just paired with dinner. It doesn't sound like you're somebody who's really into drinking alcohol for any particular reason other than the glass of wine might go with the meal.
Yeah.
Uh, and but I'm thinking that there's something about the mushroom that's alleviated whatever the alcohol or caffeine might have been doing to you. That desire is not there anymore. You don't
Yeah.
need. So that's very interesting that especially at 2 to 3 cups, that's a lot of caffeine to start a day with. I
It
don't
is.
know. I've never had a cup of coffee, but
Yeah, well, I think you're right on. I think you were spot on with that idea that for a while, maybe caffeine and the alcohol were substances that I used for coping without even knowing it. And really, when I would have wine with dinner, it wasn't just, hey, we're having dinner, let's have some wine. I would call my wife after a particularly rough day and say, hey, honey, how about I pick up a bottle and bring it up? Because I've had a crappy day, so just a coping mechanism, right? On a bad day to have alcohol. So maybe because I think so, I don't want to repeat everything you said, but I think you're right. Maybe my need for that type of coping is gone or shifted greatly because of what psilocybin has done for me. That there's this massive adjustment occurring, which is really great because I'm moving on in life and I'd like to try and be healthy for the next few decades instead of going in the other direction.
hey, and isn't there other health benefits of ingesting mushroom? And I'm not talking about taking giant trips. I'm just talking about people that microdose or like there was a mushroom I experienced. What was it called? Lion's mane.
Mm-hmm.
That seemed to be very beneficial for focusing or healing brain injuries. Can you talk
Yeah.
a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I don't know how robust the studies are, but there's a lot of talk about lion's mane mushroom, which is not a psychedelic. It's totally legal. You can buy it in your grocery store. That it has a lot of cognitive benefits. So that I was taking together my microdose of psilocybin with a daily dose of powdered lion's mane mushroom, because they both have been shown to help grow new neurons in the brain. One thing that I noticed for myself was in the months before I started the study, and it could just be a reflection of the stress I was under, but I'd go to the grocery store, go shopping for about a half hour, then come out of the grocery store, and I couldn't remember where I parked the car. I'd have to walk around a little bit, right?
Oh, yeah.
But after microdosing and taking lion's mane with it for 1 or 2 months, I could just walk out of the grocery store and I knew exactly where the car was. I didn't have to try to remember. It's as if something had been reconnected in my brain to make it just a little sharper to help me remember, which might not seem such a big deal I'm forgetting where I parked the car, but it,
It's a big deal when you're out there looking and you feel like an idiot walking around and people looking at you, I don't know where it is.
right. I know, who knows what else is going on in the mind along with that. So what else did I reverse that I'm not even aware of, or what did I heal inside the mind? And really, maybe there's nothing permanently damaging that was happening, but it's that the stress could reduce normal psychological functioning on different levels. So the alleviation of stress and maybe the benefits of the lion's mane mushroom, that I got some of my short-term memory working a little bit better, is good.
That's great.
So, it's not enough I can't call that part of a scientific study, but it's an anecdote. It's a personal anecdote that tells me, hey, that's something I'll try again if I ever notice my memory slipping. But I like to grow my own lion's mane, which is very easy to do, because one thing for anyone who's interested if you go to the grocery store, when you look at a bottle or a box of a mushroom supplement, you want to make sure it says fruiting bodies only, because a lot of times it'll say includes growing substrate or mycelial mass, which is the stuff that the mushroom grows from. But if you buy that, you're going to be buying a lot of grains and filler stuff that may not have the high potency that the actual mushroom itself has. And so it's about profit margin for a lot of these companies. And some of them will do studies that say, no, the biomass has the same benefits, but there's a reason there's a book written called How to Lie with Statistics. You can bend anything. So if anyone's really serious about beneficial mushrooms, find out how to grow them, because it's not that tough.
Want to hold your book up for everyone to see, the blue thumb, so that not only is he giving you this information, but he's showing you that you can do it yourself with 300 photos that will give you step-by-step instruction on how to do this at home if you choose to do this. This
Yeah.
was a great accomplishment to put this together.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, it offers a couple different methods, and actually in a few months I'm going to do a new edition that has a third method that'll be even easier. But they're all easy, and it's I think it's also a preserving individual rights.
Well, at the end of our show, I want to just talk a little bit about Jean, but before we get to those parts, I was wondering if we could, I just want to make sure we talk about her before I end the show later.
Yeah.
But I was wondering if you could talk about the results, and then if we could also just skip a little bit over to why UFOs were discussed in the book.
Oh, sure.
So, but if we could hear what the results were and what information you found out.
Yeah. So I always feel a little bit like, oh, before I say it out loud, because it's not what I wanted, but it's the truth that for the 6-month microdosing study, it seems, and there are graphs and charts in the book, there's no difference in performance between the people who microdose and the people who didn't microdose. But everyone did phenomenally well. There was extremely strong evidence for psychic functioning. So it's not to say that nobody was psychic. It was everybody was psychic. And even though I authored the book and I ran the project, I'm by far not the most psychic person in the group. I think there was one in each category that rated as the highest. And I don't like putting people on pedestals that way. They probably don't like that kind of attention, because these are just really good people, down to earth, open-hearted folks. They're not looking for glory or anything like that. But the results from you can see it in their transcript, that this is phenomenal work. And the microdosing had nothing to do with it. Then with the 6 months where I was taking large doses, my results were really good for me, but I don't know if they were necessarily that much better than they would have been without. But one thing that I noticed was that I was consistently performing well, instead of a good day, bad day, good day, bad day. It was consistently strong, but scientifically speaking, I cannot say that that is the effect of the psychedelic, because I had strong motivation. I was really interested in the project, which is related to motivation, but the level of interest and curiosity was there. The drive to do it, although I was also kind of getting wiped out by the experiences. All these other psychological aspects were in play that could have been the reason why I did as well as I did. Not, again, the psychedelic. The psychedelics experience showed me where not to look in my mind for the psychic functioning, because I thought maybe the hallucinations would have the psychic information in there, and they didn't. And I learned I had to look around that part of my mind within. And I wasn't sure anymore if I even had to look in my mind, or if I had to look into this other space that is hard to give words to, but another space of reality. So the hallucinations were helpful that way. They're like, don't look over here, look over there, which was really important, because meditation without substances can teach you to do the same thing. That's my short way of saying, don't go out and get psychedelics and do these tests to try and be more psychic. Just meditate, because it'll show you how to identify different parts of your mind and where perceptions come from, and where you can go to look for psychic information and where is not going to bear a lot of fruit. So basic meditation can do that for you. So scientifically, I can't say that for me the large doses improved my ability. They didn't lower the ability. But I also want to say that I had a lot of profound spiritual insights, and there was a past life regression spontaneously that was on LSD. In its own way is psychic, but it was not part of the test. So I don't even know if it's good to call this psychic, but on a spiritual level of understanding about myself my past, and the nature of reality itself. I've been meditating for decades, trying to reach some sort of some that ultimate and I'll I'll just say that these psychedelic trips got me there. And I think maybe I can credit the meditation got me ready. But what I've experienced on psychedelics was the lived experience, I think, of what so many spiritual traditions are trying to get us to experience or to see or to understand. These psychedelics, boom, got me right there. I was like, oh, this is what all my past teachers have been trying to talk about. And I even felt guilty after a while. I was like, because I've been a meditation teacher off and on, and I sort of felt foolish because there's no way meditation instructions on their own can give someone that experience. Someone really have to train, and it's not guaranteed. But so I think matching meditation, and I'm launching a program right now, matching meditation with psychedelics to actually live for a few hours that reality and experience it that all these traditions from around the world are pointing to. So that was really important. So
That's so that was one uh, large dose psychedelic experience propelled you to the place that you had been meditating and sort of searching for over the last 20 plus years in your practices. Is that correct?
yeah, yeah,
That's pretty amazing and
yeah,
pretty wonderful.
yeah. And it really, not to get political, but now I understand why this the conquistadores, when they came to South America, where they made San Pedro Wachuma, where they made it illegal because it was a threat to the Holy Eucharist in the Catholic Church. Because these substances, if you want to see God and talk to God, to use that language, psychedelica can get you there. In all my experiences, like when I was a practicing Catholic, taking that Eucharist, it's just a little wafer. And I know I don't want to upset anyone, but a psychedelic is a direct route to reality and profound spiritual understanding, which I think is a threat to religions who'd rather be a substitute or be a gateway for you to be able to contact that deeper reality, to control,
Mm.
to be a judge on you, to be a filter, that they have the power. But psychedelics put that power in the individual's hands, where they can have their own experience, where they retain their inner authority, and they gain their own wisdom and knowledge, which is extremely freeing. But I can see how that would be an extreme threat to religious traditions that rely on control of people, or on governments that rely on control of people. So
We had an Ecuadorian shaman come to stay and visit, and he was the one who first told us and taught us all about Wachuma. And he said the reason nobody even used that word Wachuma, he said, is because they wanted to hide it back those many years ago from the priests so that they didn't wipe it out of the country. So they said that's why they gave it the name San Pedro Saint, so that this way it was sort of named after a Christian saint or something. And this way they would think of it only as like a lovely cactus with the name of a saint. And that's what they chose to do to protect the Wachuma from being removed from their culture.
mhm.
Uh, the Huichols have peyote. I mean, each cultures do have this. It might be a plant. I'm not sure which particular one they have, but it seems a lot of cultures, indigenous cultures have some sort of a stimulant of some sort of plant or nature thing that they use in ceremony
Yeah,
and have for thousands of years, probably.
yeah. I can't remember his name. There's a Western Lama Michael. I think it's Lama Crowley. He has a couple of books on Amazon. If anyone Googles psychedelic drugs and Buddhism, I think that's the one. But look for Michael Crowley. He has some videos on YouTube, and so he's done a lot of research, and he believes that a lot of the tantric rituals and visualizations and the liturgies secretly are describing psychedelic plants that are part of the ritual that used to be done, or maybe is done behind closed doors now, but is not publicly known. And I should say that as someone who has practiced Tibetan Buddhism in my past, I don't really relate to it at all anymore. when I had my psychedelic experiences, I I was like, this is what they were talking about. When you visualize the deity, the perfection of reality, the beauty, the clarity, and the emptiness, these fundamental basis of mind, I could see that the visualizations, which are extensive, are trying to replicate the psychedelic experience. And there are substances involved, like dilute alcohol, and some rituals are used for blessing, but also taking a little bit as a blessing and consecration of oneself. But I could see how if you replace that with an actual psychedelic plant and then do these rituals, then you're having the real deal experience. But that's, again, that would leave everyone, that would make everyone free. So that's my little political there.
Freeing them from themselves. So, we're almost at an hour, but that does not mean we're done talking, because we really need to discuss about why are UFOs discussed in your book. And it seems like both these two topics, both two books that you have published in August, your timing is impeccable. And the fact that your one book, um, a public self-care guide on the UFO, and because there are people reading and hearing things in the news now that are being exposed to the possibilities that some of this information may not all be a hoax. What is it that you can tell us about what you discussed in the book about UFOs?
Yeah, so in this book, The Dewdrops of Infinity, I bring up the UFO topic because there's doing things that are being shown in the news or described in the news that are very close, if not an exact match, for psychic abilities. Um, for example, the fact that they can appear and disappear at will, that they can have, the beings in them can have telepathic communication with humans. And if people have watched the recent documentaries, Ariel, that's Ariel, Phenomena, that's incredible documentary. School children had telepathic communication with these beings that came out of a craft. Moment of Contact is another good one. I mean, there's several excellent ones that have come out in the last 5 years. But so telepathy is an aspect of them, moving through space and changing directions at incredible speeds. And there's an example from US Navy pilots where they described that they were chasing some UFOs, they disappeared, and the pilots were ordered to fly to what's called a CAP point, a combat air patrol point. So another point they were told to go to. And as soon as they turned to go there, they got this communication, if I'm telling the story right, from the radar people. Hey, guess what? The UFOs just appeared at the point that you'll be arriving at, where we just ordered you to go. The UFOs just appeared there, like they're going to be waiting for you. So there's telepathy there, but also, well, I'll just stop there. There's a 5th century Buddhist text called the Visuddhimagga. It's called the Path of Purification, and it's on Amazon if people want to look it up, which describes how to develop the supernormal skills, the superpowers, basically, the psychic abilities, how to use meditation to develop them. And if you look at the list of these psychic abilities, they match the list of special abilities that UFOs exhibit, which tells me that UFOs, or whoever's piloting them, has a very profound and practical sense of the role of consciousness in reality, including our physical reality. Somehow they're using mind and technology, and they know the rules of reality much better than we do. So they can move forward and backward in time, they can read minds, they can cross great distances, they can cross through space, atmosphere, and water and rock. They've been filmed coming in and out of volcanoes. They know how to move through different substances, which is another of the psychic abilities, to turn land into water and go swimming in the dirt like it's water. These are classic abilities. So I wanted to bring that up in this book, that is an explanation that if we as human beings want to understand UFOs better, we need to understand consciousness and the psychic functioning of our mind even better. there's, and I don't know if it's true or not, but a lot of people are saying that our government does have actual craft in storage somewhere, and scientists are trying to figure out how to make them work. And so I write in the book, if we can replace our soldier scientists with yogi scientists, or scientists who are working on exploring their inside, the inside of their mind, as much as they are on working on physics, we'll get a lot further faster in understanding how to fly these craft or how to build our own that are keenly tied to consciousness. I think consciousness is a fundamental force, just like gravity and time are. But gravity and time are relative, and so consciousness may be also. And they just have a mastery over it. The other the other reason I mention UFOs is because of the psychic soup, that this idea that these mental objects come from some space that I don't know where they're coming from. And I'm pretty sure that our four-dimensional space of physical space, length, width, and height, and the fourth dimension of time that we experience, time moving in one direction for us, that's just one version of reality. And there must be a fundamental place, something more fundamental that projects places like our physical universe. Maybe there are universes out there in 5, 6, or 11 dimensions. And I'm sure many physicists would line up and say, yes, yes, look at string theory or whatever. But so I think that the space where psychic information flows through, which anyone who's involved with remote viewing, especially associative remote viewing, we're looking into the future, and it's no problem. Looking into the future is as easy as looking into the present. There's this non-dimensional space that I propose, non-dimensional, from which everything is projected. And I think that non-dimensional space is not only the place where psychic information can come and go or be shared, but I wonder if these UFOs that's where they're dipping into and out of when they're moving across space, when they're appearing somewhere else instantly. They're re-entering this non-dimensional space and popping back out at the location and time that they want to be in. So I think they have some access to that. It's just a hypothesis. So maybe it'll take several hundred years to figure out if the hypothesis has any meat on the bone. But I think what I've discovered and experienced about psychic functioning and what we've observed so far, thanks to our Navy pilots and anyone else with a camera, that there's something to it, that the UFOs and the role of consciousness and psychic functioning, that they all share some qualities there. And we might never be able to capture a UFO or interview whoever is driving it. So the next best thing is to look within ourselves. Can we develop our knowledge of our human consciousness? And I mean the non-physical consciousness, not just the physical brain, but this deeper level that expands beyond space and time. A part of us that existed before we were born, that exists after we pass away. And I'm sure that anyone who's involved with near-death experiences, remote viewing, past life regression, a lot of them might be saying, oh yes, I have something to add to that conversation too. So this is, I just have a little piece of information, but maybe other people have other pieces that we can put together. And maybe some scientists too, hopefully.
Well, I have to say, remote viewing taught me that time was not how we perceive it. That's where I learned that there was that anything that happened in the past, the present, or the future could all be seen with remote viewing in that moment. So that showed me that time can't be the way this linear thing, that's how it all works. So I just want to say to our listeners, I truly believe that that's the truth in that area from my own experiences. And that's all we can share here is our own experiences on some of these things, because that's what has happened and what we know to be true for us. And I'm sure that time is not like we think of it. It's just not. So what when you were doing any of your extensive work in this particular book, was there times where you did any UFO experience during your testing, or when you were taking large quantities, or was it just something you were discussing separately, or did you actually have any experiences during those times?
Yeah, so the UFO thing wasn't a part of the study at all, but I just bring it in because of the timeliness of it and the association I make it with psychic functioning. However, twice I had sightings spontaneously, so unplanned. And one of the sightings happened in the evening of, I think it was the evening the day I did LSD, or maybe it was the psilocybin trip, the big one. But it was earlier in the day when I tripped. And so these trips are many hours long, right? And so in the evening, I asked Sierra to drive me, because I didn't want to drive for safety, to drive me to the grocery store because I had a hankering for some ice cream or something. And as we're driving back to our condo, I just look up in the sky and I saw something. I, I don't want to fill space by describing it, but I saw something. The second time I had a sighting during the study was the day after I had a DMT experience, which was really powerful. It really shook me to my bones. But the next day, I went to a coffee shop, and when I left, this was in the afternoon, I was sitting in my car at a stoplight, and I look up and saw something. And I described these in the book briefly, but I saw something there. And I've had better sightings in the past. I've gone to like viewing circles with the intention of seeing them and to make contact. So I've seen them in that context, but here spontaneously, I saw them twice. And it's interesting to me that they happen within hours or a day of taking psychedelics. And there's something that I didn't put in the book because I'm only realizing it now. And if anyone does research on something called critical period of the brain, it's a critical period, like as children or infants, when our brain is wide open to learning new information, like who's mama, who can I trust, or particular talents can come out during critical periods, like someone develops a musical ability. And then the critical period closes where we stop specializing and we're not absolutely open to learning some of these things. But I have a new hypothesis that, and they have talked about this with psychedelics, that they reopen the critical period. And I've experienced spontaneously being really psychic in the hours or days after a trip. And so I think that's why I had these sightings, was because I was particularly open and I was able to see these craft right after having a psychedelic. And of course, you don't need to do psychedelics to see UFOs. You can go out in the middle of the afternoon, dead sober, and see them. So I'm not telling people to go use drugs and to see UFOs. But that it happened to me, it coincides with the idea of a critical period opening. And so I wonder if I could go back in time and do all these tests, maybe I should have done the ESP tests the following day after doing the psychedelic.
Oh, interesting.
Maybe my performance would be better then. Or maybe if I take a psychedelic and for a week or two after that, train very consistently while that critical period is open, would that take me to the next level? Now, personally, because of the spiritual insights I had on the psychedelics, I'm no longer interested in trying to become more psychic. You might be the last interview I do on any of this parapsychological stuff. You might be the last one because, and that's a whole other conversation, but I feel right now, because of all I've seen and experienced on psychedelics and in meditation, that being a regular human being with the limitations that the body has, that's where it's at. That's the most sacred thing. And that's where we get the most out of life, or at least for me. So I'm no longer trying to like get more psychic or develop more abilities. I might still teach them here and there in the future, because I think for everyone in a stage of life, it might be important for them. But for me, I'm sort of done with all this stuff.
But you've put so much out there for people to read, watch, listen to, experience themselves by practicing. Before I ever had you as a guest, I'd watched your video on telekinesis with a pin and a glass over it and a little piece of aluminum foil, and using your mind to move that piece of foil with your mind, and you give excellent instructions. So I mean, I could see you coming to a point of like, well, this is enough. I've done so much here. You've done an incredible amount of stuff. So I think you might be moving on to your next chapters. That
Yeah.
doesn't mean I'm sure you're going to still be writing books, because you seem amazing with the amount of books that you write. I I'm wondering about one thing I just want to thank you for, because just like you've had the experience of seeing something in the sky and knowing that that was a different object of some nature or form, people are sort of really wanting that experience to connect or see something. And it showed me this when we were out on Lake Sonoma here, and it was at night, and we got off the boat and we came up to the parking lot, and there was only a few people there because it was later at night, and everyone's looking up at the sky, and I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, this is it. We're really seeing, I'd never seen anything like this in the sky in my life. And it was only when we spoke to you that we found out it wasn't what we thought. I'm so glad, even though it did burst our exciting bubble, we were so happy to have the truth. And you can tell me what it was called because I forget. But when we looked up, it was a stream of lights, all evenly spaced. And there was like 30 of them. And it was coming across the sky in like an arched form. And there was a couple of like partying drunk young people, and they were the first ones to scream in the parking lot. So we looked up, they were screaming UFOs, UFOs. So we looked up and we were in awe at what we saw.
Yeah.
So I'm like sort of the skeptic when it comes to this. My husband's ready to go up in whenever the ship comes. He's jumping in, he can't wait to go. And I keep telling him I'm staying on Earth, you can come back later or whatever, we can be biplanetary. And the excitement that it brought to everyone at the thought that we had actually seen this. And then can you explain to us what we really saw? Because you're the one who told us, and that's what it was.
Yeah, so what you're describing perfectly is the Starlink system from Elon Musk. And a lot of people, I see this on Facebook all the time, that, hey, here's a UFO, here's a picture. Like, and everyone replies, I'm sorry, but that's Starlink.
Yes.
But interestingly, just this week, someone told me that they went out to look at Starlink and they saw UFOs around the Starlink. And so I think it's possible that these beings are picking up on, hey, here's the Starlink happens to get people's attention. So let's go hang out near the Starlink so they see us too. I think that's a possibility, but that happened for this friend of mine just a few days ago. So it's interesting that you're mentioning that now because of what my friend just told me. But that desire to see UFOs, I understand it now more than ever, because I realized that to see a UFO, and with a UFO's connection to consciousness and to the profound level of reality, it's like a spiritual search, that when we see a UFO, we're actually seeing a deep aspect of ourselves, a deep aspect of our reality. It's like the UFO is almost like the same thing as using a psychedelic. It gives us access or a little peek at what the fundamental reality is really like, what's really possible, what's going on under the layers. That life is much bigger than what we normally on a day-to-day basis think our life is all about. That something much bigger is happening. So I can see that it can be pretty much a religious experience for someone to see it in the sky and go, there's one. Because when we look at a UFO, we're looking at, in a sense, at the deepest part of our reality. So I think it's really meaningful. And I used to poo-poo it a little bit, like, oh, everyone's out chasing UFOs, even though I was chasing UFOs too. I don't understand it. It's a sacred moment to witness something like that. It's profoundly sacred. And of course, it can be upsetting for some people, which is why I wrote the other book, because it presents a worldview crisis for some people. And those people are silently worried because these are showing up in the news now. What does this mean? So that I don't want to go into it now, but that's why I wrote the other book. But before we finish, should we talk about Jean Millay?
Yes, I wanted to ask you, did you find a copy of her book, or did you only get it online?
So the one I saw on Amazon that night, even though I downloaded, I found a PDF somewhere, I ordered that copy.
So you have a copy.
I have it, yeah.
I would
And
have sent you one had you needed it.
thanks. Yeah, these are like precious, precious jewels. Her book is so precious. So anyone who's got one out there, hang on to it. Like, don't.
I will have a photo of it right up on the screen for us when this show airs.
Yeah.
I want to just bring up Jean Malay for a second, and I want to bring up, let's see.
I'm noticing what's on your neck.
Yes, that's exactly what I wanted to talk about. I just wanted to just go over into here. So I wanted to just talk about this, and I wanted to just quickly read this, even though it feels egotistical, but I was so honored that you mentioned me in the beginning of your book. So I wanted to read that first, and then I wanted to explain to the audience. I wanted you to tell the story of what I'm wearing around my neck.
Okay.
So in Sean's book, he writes, to Gail Hyson, thank you for your friendship during this time. Something magical happened related to your friend, Jean Malay. It's hard to explain how or why, but I believe my connection with you was integral to its occurrence and to me trusting it. Most importantly, your life example teaches that even modern people can access, embody, and experience the wisdom, insight, and rituals preserved by ancient cultures around the world. Whenever I doubted what I experienced and how I was changing inside, I thought of you. I was so emotional when I read that, and I was so touched by it, but it brings about our connection with Jean. And I just want our audience to know I'm wearing Jean's dress, which was one of her most popular dresses she wore to most of the talks she gave. And I was with her for many years and got to be with her while she wore this dress. And then I was so thrilled that her daughter sent it to me as a gift after she had passed. So I'm bringing Jean Malay with us in the dress. And then I want to explain from you what this little blue glass stone that I'm wearing around my neck means and how I got this.
Yeah. Oh, this is so perfect.
And
This is
that'll
such
be
a
the end of
perfect
our
way.
show. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, so I'll talk about Jean and the stone, and then I want to talk about what I wrote about you at the very end. But so with Jean, during the study, during the second half, when I was taking large doses, so after I found her book, and because I know of her connection with you, I thought about Jean a lot. And one day I was driving across town. I had to be somewhere, and I listened to a lot of YouTube interviews while I drive, and I found one with Jean Malay. And so I started listening to it, and I got partway through the interview where she talks about the fact that we teach it out of our children to believe that we're multidimensional beings, and we need to remember that being multidimensional is natural, that it's part of us, and we kind of become these adults that stop believing in that stuff, and we tell our kids not to believe in it. And right after I heard that aspect of it, and I might be, I had this this is kind of embarrassing, but I had this sudden urge. I had to pull over and find a restroom. So there was a Starbucks right there. So I pull over, I go inside, and it's a very small store. And I use the restroom, and when I come out, I figure I'll order a coffee for the rest of my drive. And I look around, and there may be 3 other people in the store. They're sitting down. There's someone in line in front of me, and I'm just waiting. And then he orders his coffee and he leaves. And there are only 2 baristas there. One is in the back doing something, and then there's the guy dealing with me. Or I order my coffee, and then he turns around and he's spending a few minutes doing whatever he needs to do. And I'm just standing there quietly in this very quiet coffee shop. And this bright blue light, I see it out of the corner of my eye, just shows up at about the level of my knee, like in space, right in front of my knee. But I sort of ignore it. It's just out of my realm of expectation. So consciously, I see it, but I ignore it. But then I hear a single tapping sound on the floor, and I ignore that too. And then I hear a scraping, like this thing is moving. And I look down, and I see this beautiful, bright blue glass bead about that big. What is that? And then my mind quickly puts the dots together. Like, this thing appeared in space right in front of me, and it was like placed on the floor and then moved. And so I pick it up and it just looks like an ordinary blue glass bead, like you might see in one of those fireplaces with glass beads. But my mind is this an apport, an apparition from the other side? I think, is it not? And I get my coffee. The guy finally gives me my coffee and I'm holding this bead. And after a couple of minutes, he must think I'm nuts because I'm still in the store, but I'm looking everywhere on every wall, every display. I'm looking for where the blue beads at. This must have fallen off of something. It must have fallen from the ceiling. If there's blue beads up there, is it in the display case for the water bottles? There was not another blue bead anywhere. But here I am, like, doubting my experience, just the way she had been talking about in her interview right before I had to pull over. And so I take the blue bead and I get in the car and continue to listen to the interview. And then it continues saying things that exactly refer to my experience of what just happened and my self-doubt. And I'm trying to be too adult and logical about it. And I'm keeping myself from believing my own two eyes of this miracle, that this mysterious object, that maybe it came from the same place that psychic thoughts come from, or where spirits are, or who knows where, but this little miracle happened. And I'm still fighting myself, it's part of my nature. Ever since I started doing psychic stuff years ago, I've always been really hard on myself. And really, it's not easy for me to believe these things that even though I've experienced it and there's great evidence, some part of me would prefer that it wasn't real. That's always there. And I have to overcome that over and over again. So there's this beautiful blue bead that I received, and I had seen your blue dress on some other interview. And while I'm listening to Jean Malay's interview, I'm like, I think this is from Jean. Because of that, also that she had prompted me, I think, in the middle of the night to go and find her book. Like, it all points to Jean, who's this incredible researcher, and I know she has a connection with you. And so I think our friend Donna Rebido turned it into this beautiful necklace that you're wearing now.
Holding this up for everyone to see. And Donna Rebedel she said, it's our friendship. The way she has it holding together, it's like a friendship of you and her together. And I feel very protected when I wear it. I have it's just a very special piece for me. Yeah. I just was wondering, the funny part was 2 days before this came in the mail, after she put it together, and I was very thrilled when you gave this to me in Colorado. A few days before this came in the mail, 2 days later, Stanley Krippner came for dinner. When he came for dinner, the first thing he wanted to show me was pictures of 2 apports that had come to his home that he had just recently found. And I had been at his house once before where he had apports from Brazil, from different groups of people where he had been, and they were all being sent off to a lab in Canada that actually does some sort of studies, and people who have apports send it to this university or this particular lab in Canada. I don't have the name at the tip of my tongue, but for those of us, including myself, who knew very little bit about this for some reason, could you just explain the apport, and I won't bother you with any more questions?
No, because I still want to talk about you. But so if someone wants to Google it, it's APPORT, and these are objects. They're really well known in mediumship circles because they're these physical objects. So imagine you're sitting in a circle of people and a medium at a table. They turn out the lights in many cases, and there's nothing else that should be in the room. But suddenly objects fall from the air, or they appear on the table or on the floor. It could be flowers, stones, crystals, coins from other historical eras. All these things are coming from this other side. It's like they're gifts or messages from the other side, and they can take many different forms. And Stanley Krippner is the foremost researcher on these, and there are museums that have collected many of them. In some cases, people will collect them, but then they disappear. They just like vanish into thin air after some time. That happens in some cases, but some have stayed around since they were found. So I think that's what happened to me. I had a spontaneous one in broad daylight inside of a Starbucks. This thing just, but the synchronicity is undeniable, along with all the psychic evidence that people see in the book. Like, yes, Sean, when are you going to stop doubting yourself so much? So it was like hitting me over the head that these realms are absolutely real. And that Donna's connected because she made that necklace for you. And I know you've interviewed her. She's got her tie with the other side. She's had near-death experiences and she's very psychic herself. So like, I think this happens that we find each other, we connect with each other because there's that wavelength. Like there's that feeling that we have that we've seen something, which is really great. But at the end of the day, I think it comes down to love and connection and friendship. And that's really the most important thing for me anyway, not so much the psychic stuff. We'll all be dead one day anyway, and we'll have a party on the other side and laugh at ourselves. So, but and one reason I can speak this way so openly is because of you, because of what I wrote about you and the acknowledgments that your example that, you're this woman from, was it New York or New Jersey?
Oh, New York, Flushing, New York.
Yeah, from New York, modern woman, and you've been initiated into a Mongolian tradition and also the Huichol tradition. You've been accepted by them. You do these practices. You have this access. At the same time, you're this modern, and I'll just say white. You're this modern white lady, and you're just like you just are. And I know you have your own struggles with it too sometimes, but you're this embodiment of what's possible. That this is a human phenomenon to have access with the spiritual realms and psychic functioning. It's universal for all of us. And I had my own struggle because during the study, some part of my brain really opened up to the power of music and vibrational music specifically. And I had to overcome my imposter syndrome because here's my drum here, which some people would call a shaman drum, but I think it's more appropriate to call it a frame drum. But the drum might be the oldest musical instrument in human history. And I had to learn to use one on my own because I'm not a shaman. I'm not initiated into anything. But on my own, I broke down and bought one and used it during my journeys and have been using it ever since and find it. But I had to overcome that self-doubt. Like, I'm this modern white guy who's not initiated into anything. Is it okay for me to use a drum and not feel like I'm pretending to be a shaman, or I'm not culturally appropriating in any way? But so your example is like, it's okay for me to use music. I'm a human being with a human brain, and I'm receptive to music. It affects me a certain way. So I'm going to use a drum. And since then, I've learned how to use different types of flutes and the mouth harp, which is also a shamanic instrument. But I'm not doing it to try and be a shaman. I'm just doing it to try and access my inner consciousness. So every time I had a doubt, I thought of you. I'm like, Gail, she's totally normal, down to earth, no ego, like no unhealthy ego type thing about this thing. Because we can see that out there. People who are like puffing themselves up a little bit, like, oh, I took a weekend seminar and now I'm a shaman. Like, well, maybe, I don't know. So I really didn't want to be like that. But if I let it stop me, I wouldn't have this, and I wouldn't have this. It wouldn't give me access that I need to go within. So you, in your example, gives me the confidence to explore my insides.
Well, you touch my heart because I always worry that, gee, whenever I hope I've made a difference somewhere, or I hope I've helped someone somehow, or somehow made an effect. Always feel sort of like, well, I'm just really a nobody, nothing. But when I hear something like that, I feel like, okay, just keep doing what you're doing and just being yourself. And whatever effects it has or ripples out to other people is a wonderful thing. And I just want the audience to know, before every time I start a podcast, I jaw harp the name of the person that's going to be on my show, and I burn my sage that I grew myself in my yard, and I light a candle. And I just feel that before each show, it's like a little blessing and a way of, I feel like I'm then connecting with the being that's going to be in this screen here, but we're connecting on another different level besides just the screen. So I just want you to know that it's a very important tool to me, and I appreciate what the jaw harp does, and that I like you feel like an imposter, even though I was initiated as a Mongolian shamanism. I always sort of feel like, who, me? What are you talking about? But then amazing things happen, and then you say, oh, that's why they said that. So I really appreciate receiving your validation. It just means the world to me. I'm very, very pleased. I I feel it's our time to wind up because we're come to the end now, and I want to thank you for all those nice things you said. But I just want to ask if there's any other words of wisdom, and especially since you're not planning to do any more interviews. But let's never say never, because we never want to say never. You never know. All of a sudden, you might want to come on again. Is there any words of wisdom or anything you'd want to share with our audience and listeners before we go to our closing talk?
Sure. Well, the most important thing I think I realized or was reinforced during that year and since then is just to be alive is enough. It's just as sacred as any other type of experience. I really literally saw that a speck of dirt is as sacred and valuable as a piece of gold. And you might be watching this and you're thinking, oh, I'm not psychic at all. What's wrong with me? Or I wish I could be more psychic or more spiritual. Well, guess what? It's totally okay that whoever you are right now, whatever difficulty you're having, and this could be tough to hear if your life is really tough right now, but your life is held within this larger reality and everything is flowing in a beautiful way, even though it might not feel beautiful for you right now. But if there's a way you can recall that there's something inside happening that's sacred and beautiful beyond being good or bad or anything like that. But it's just, we are all, just by being alive, we're inherent, valuable parts of the universe equally, and we all matter. So hang on. If you're having a hard time, hang on, find help. I'm a therapist now here in Colorado, so that's my focus, is helping people hang on, because life is hard sometimes, but all our lives are sacred, even if our life feels particularly crummy sometimes, or um, all life is sacred, which it's still worthwhile to try and save planet Earth, to try and conserve. It doesn't mean that we can go around hurting everybody because everything is fine. Like, we still have to try and be good people, I think, have empathy for each other. But everything's okay on a fundamental level. Everything is fine. So that's the insight that I got.
Well,
But I
that's
think,
beautiful, beautiful thought to share, and I hope our listeners really receive what you just said, because I think that's a very important piece, just to be okay with everything the way it is.
mhm,
It's all going to be okay. It's all,
yeah.
we are all one connected beings.
Mhm.
So I want to thank you so much for being here today. And while I do my closing, just stay right there with us. Audience, I hope you've enjoyed our show today. I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank my daughter Nancy and my son Richard for posting and producing this show for me. I want to thank the listeners. Our last show, 2 shows ago, I think it was number 56, was Joanna Kern, and we had over 26,000 views and 5,000 thumbs up. So thank you, and a shout out to all those people who happen to listen. It's hard to even imagine 27,000 people almost, but thank you, thank you. I hope to see that kind of numbers again. I also want to say, share stories, talk about all these things with each other, whatever thing comes to your mind, because you never know what healing that will occur when you share stories with each other. So thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. You'll find us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Google, and all the other social media sites. And stay tuned, because in 2 weeks, as you know, we're every other Wednesday, we'll have Donna Ribadow, and she'll be talking about her new book. So we have 2 different Colorado people in a row, and looking forward to having her as well. So thank you all. Have a wonderful few weeks, and we look forward to seeing you, hearing from you, sending your comments, liking and sharing. Have a great time, and thank you for watching a Small Medium at Large podcast. Bye.